I spent about an hour last night going through all my emails from March 2020 because it was a stressful time for many of us. My name is Nikki Chavoya, and I'm a practitioner in residence here at the Department of Communication, Film, and Media Studies. When we moved to online so quickly, that was a difficult adjustment. Initially, we were shut down and told that we were going to have a break. And then we were told that we were going to be online, but then spring break was coming up. By March 16th, we knew that we were going to be remote, and they had been telling us throughout the week, be prepared to go online for the rest of the semester. Think about what that might look like for your different classes, how it might impact the students, and how it's going to work for you.
I'm Meg Savalonis. I am an associate professor. I teach in many departments. There was a transition plan in place in the sense that we had, as faculty, been talking about using Zoom, for example, and of course, we were still using Blackboard as our learning management system at that time, and I was really familiar with Blackboard, so I wasn't too panicked about having to create assignments and do things.
I'm Dr. Chris Dowd. I'm chairman of the English department, professor of English, and so initially the idea was we would be teaching online for 2 weeks, which would be chaotic in and of itself. As chair of a department, I knew many of the faculty in my department had not taught online before, did not really have familiarity with the Blackboard tools that would be needed.
My name is Cindy Gallatin. I am Chief Strategy Officer. I run digital learning, and when I first came here, I was Chief Digital Learning Officer. As we've been teaching faculty to be more comfortable with online learning and technology, a number of faculty, including myself, didn't have that for our education. So it's how can we make people very comfortable and confident in using it.
And one thing that they were repeating over and over in their emails was, you handle it the way that it's best for you. They gave us a lot of flexibility, and I think during that time, had they had a year to turn us into an online university, I'm sure we would have had a lot of training and great resources, but what we needed was flexibility and space to do whatever we thought was best that week and in that time.
In the theater program, we do a Student New Works Festival of plays every other year. It's highly collaborative, and once everybody was separated from one another, it felt not impossible, but again, it took us sort of time to figure out what an even manageable structure for that would be.
There was also just challenges with helping faculty members who were struggling more than usual because they were not as familiar with the technology.
I'm not sure I ever cracked Zoom learning.
While it was challenging, I think it was also exciting from the point of view that we were doing some really innovative things.
I felt very supported in that way, that there was nothing I was going to do wrong as long as I was doing my best to still give the instruction I needed to do throughout the semester, but also make sure that I was taking care of my students emotionally and academically.
I think there was a lot of apprehension at first. People were a little shocked that we were going to be moving so quickly.
Nobody had a summer off. Everyone was working.
I worked with faculty members to run training workshops to help them learn how to teach online. We had hundreds of faculty members participate, and we rolled out the Canvas learning management system.
And the nice thing about it was that they kept all our Blackboard courses up so that those of us were still learning Canvas could still refer to our old courses on Blackboard.
My team and I help move faculty from Blackboard learning management system to Canvas in 10 weeks. And then moving from there, we have continued to expand the use of Canvas, the use of technology, the integration of videos and multimedia into courses.
How you engage the class and foster class discussions and works very differently, and that can be tricky to work out. You might have to make some changes.
The first thing I had to do to adjust to an online class was send out a survey to all of my students to figure out, 1, did they have internet access? 2, what could they film on?
So many of our classes are about eliciting responses from students and getting them to think critically about texts and voice their own opinions, with the instructor largely being kind of the coach, kind of teasing out ideas.
One of the biggest changes for me was assessing student work, because I felt like I was disconnected from them, and it was really hard to, couldn't do workshops as easily as I would have liked to have done and have peer collaboration.
So a lot of that dynamic is students learning to trust each other and riff off each other and respond to what each other is saying, and it was such a struggle to build that kind of community.
Those things were hard. It definitely was overwhelming.
So I taught classes where it was me staring into my computer screen with no one with their camera on, and I'm supposed to be lecturing like I would in a classroom, but there's absolutely no feedback. I can't even really tell if students are there. I can't see people's responses to see who, like if someone confused.
Luckily, when I first started as an adjunct, I had to go through an online course myself. And I really enjoyed that class when I first started here, and it was a class for teachers, but I liked the way that they had structured it, so I decided to structure my courses in the same way. It's a writing workshop, and at that time I had only taught it in person. The best way to approach the online version of that class was to provide guided tutorials, full 20-minute lectures where students could go through, rewind, go back to certain parts that they thought would be helpful, and just have a resource that later on, years later, they could go back to.
Sometimes in class, I will do written responses to readings as a springboard, get people out of their heads and onto the page. That's the way I say it. It's really hard to get out of your head and onto the page in Zoom.
I think for a lot of people it has clarified how almost social an experience education is, how much you need the in-person element, you need to be there with the students, and the students need to be with each other.
There's also no accountability. If you don't have that sense of, well, I'm letting someone else in my group down, or why should that person be the only person who ever participates? You know, you've been in classes and you go like, okay, that person's talked 3 times. I will also jump in there. I never felt that on Zoom. I felt like it became the burden of like one student to kind of keep the dialogue going.
The impact of the pandemic on students, I think, is substantial.
People had to try to come up with policies, and I was on a committee, actually, the Academic and Student Affairs Committee that deals with academic policy, and we were constantly in meetings trying to figure out if a class really needs a lockdown browser, but what is the impact on students? Students who have ARC needs to be met, for example, or students who simply don't have that level of equipment.
Technically, there were skills that they couldn't practice. They weren't trained on the cameras that we normally use, and that was certainly a hindrance moving forward for them in their classes. Because all of my students were at home shooting their narrative projects, some of them were just expressing feelings that they had about being isolated or stressed or nervous about what was going on in the world.
There were things that we used to be able to assume they had covered in high school that we couldn't assume were covered to quite the extent we were accustomed to.
If I have to, for a few years, go backwards and say, okay, yes, you have to do it this way and this way only, or you have to write about this topic and this topic only, then I'm gonna do that. And loads of folks, psychologists, sociologists, people in the field of education are looking at these trends and patterns for, say, students who had to start doing Zoom when they were 10th grade, 11th grade on, and then had some sort of hybrid from there. When they get here, there's still a disconnect. Students have, rightfully so, anxiety around grades. I was probably more collaborative with my students in their learning process that semester in trying to just make them less anxious. I used to teach high school. I feel like I'm back in high school right now. I feel like there are a lot of skills that were not developed. That is not the fault of the students, it's the fault of the situation that they were in. We are talking heads who are there to do something, but not people to have relationships with. It's weird. I don't feel like my students know me as a person, or actually, this is gonna sound really bad, but consider me a person. That's something I've actually struggled with a lot since Zoom school coming back.
Artificial intelligence has rapidly been adopted or really come on the education scene in the past year. I think it's important for students to be prepared to utilize it in not only an effective manner, but an ethical manner and a responsible manner.
To me, it's just a symptom, again, of our further, particularly for humanities and fine arts. AI is like, it has so much promise, but it's also so dangerous. My biggest concern is just what I see as a decline in sort of critical thinking skills and problem solving.
And students need to understand that they need to validate and review anything that comes out of something like ChatGPT. So now that we're in post-pandemic society, my role is focused not just solely online, but it's really supporting faculty for hybrid courses as well as on-campus courses. So I always say to people, a lot of the things I do now didn't exist when I was in college. And so it's a good way to think about your career, that you're going to be doing things in the future that don't exist right now.
So for writing for the media, that was a pretty natural transition, and that class has stayed an online course, and I think that it works really well.
There are some that I'm more comfortable recommending an online class to than others because I know their learning style and where they will thrive and where they won't.
Online classes can be great if a student is able to manage their time well and is open to having ongoing communication with an instructor.
Some of the technologies that the university invested in are still here and they're good. You know, there's improvements in the technology we have in classrooms now.
Just learning how to better use Canvas and the online tools available for my classes, whether it's for assignments or in the event of a snowstorm, it keeps everything rolling, and I think it makes for stronger assignments outside of class and better communication between me and my students.
It has simplified a lot of stuff that used to be pretty annoying. I hated teaching on Zoom. Of all the different modalities we invented during the pandemic to teach in, I thought that was the least effective. I personally will never willingly teach on Zoom again. I'm more keenly aware of things beyond the classroom that are influencing students' lives and my life. And I try to be more patient, providing support and encouragement that can sometimes be tough love to get students to do what they need.